In this episode of Collect or Reject,
does that sway your verdict one way or the other as far as whether or not this comic series is a collectible?
Yeah. Whether you a hero or a villain, expedition leads to crazy feelings. Every page I turn, you know I gotta feel it. New stories everywhere, busting out the comic strip. Story so good, it got me on a power trip. Crazy battles got my mind in a total race. Page 1, the original story takes place. So gear up for the new storyline. Writing so good it sends chills down your spine. Collect or reject, 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 collect or reject.
Greetings, true believers. Welcome to Collect or Reject, a show about comics, or more specifically, lesser known comics. My name is Mark Withers, and I'm honored and privileged to be your host today. Here's how it works. Each week, a guest and I will read 5 issues of a pre-selected title, and based on those 5 issues, we'll try and determine whether or not that comic should be added to your pull list. Today's comic, Something is Killing the Children by James Tynion IV and Werther Dell'Edera. Joining me today to talk about it is not only a longtime personal friend of mine, but he's also the host of the popular Chicago-based show Off the Beaten podcast. Ladies and gentlemen, Dion McGill. Dion, thanks for being on the show, man.
Of course, brother. Thank you. Thank you for having me. It's always glad. It's glad to be here. I'm sorry. I'm so excited. I hadn't heard your golden voice for like forever, bro. So I'm like,
I know.
I forgot how good Mark sounds. This is great.
Thank you, man. Likewise. You are one of my favorite people. I've known you going on what would you say, probably like almost like 20 years now.
It's gotta be at least like somewhere between. It's like my life goes in these stages just because of the different things I've done and been fortunate to do. So somewhere around that 2000 to 2004, when I think of that period, that's when I worked at Guitar Center. So right. I met a lot of musicians. I was singing in a band then. So we might have even met right before 2000, like maybe 98, 99.
Maybe.
Because it was around the 506 days. And so that would have, that'd have been around 2000. So yeah.
I think it was the early 2000s because I remember this pretty clearly. And for those of you that don't know either of us, the way that I met Dion is Dion used to be in a band called Under My Skin. And he was leaving that band temporarily because he was in the Army and he was actually being stationed overseas.
Okay.
And I was actually auditioning to be the new singer of that band. And the day that I met Dion, like Ozfest was going to be like a couple days later. And he was like, "Hey man, I got an extra ticket to Ozfest. You want to go with us?" And I was like, "Yeah, like how much you want for this ticket?" He was like, "Nah, it's on me, brother. Like, let's just go hang out." And he took me to Ozfest for free. And I had like an absolute blast, not only because like we saw all these killer bands, like we saw Black Sabbath and Slipknot and God Forbid and all these killer bands, but like this dude was just like a breath of fresh air just to like be around, you know what I mean? And he was like one of my very first friends in Chicago. We're still friends today. And so yeah, man, so this is like a very special episode for. I had to do like one more because I've already wrapped up my season, but I had to do one more with Dion because like you're just like you're just that dude, man. So I appreciate you.
Thank you, brother. And your memory is great. I'm like, yeah, he's so right. That's exactly. Yes, that's awesome, brother. Yes, and it's been a pleasure over the year. I'm glad we're still friends. You know.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Likewise, man. So I usually kick these things off by asking my guests about how they kind of got into comics. First of all, I didn't even know that you were a comic book reader until like we were messaging one day and you were like saying, "Hey, I got to stop by the comic book shop and pick up Something is Killing the Children." I was like, wait a minute. Like, you read comics? You got to do this show. So yeah, if you could, man, just give us a little bit of background and how you got into comics.
You know what? I've been reading comics since I was a kid. But yes, and when I was a kid, I was a huge fan of the X-Men. I was a huge fan of X-Force. I didn't read Superman. I didn't read Batman. I was all about the Marvel kind of mutants, as we refer to them today. Wolverine was like my absolute favorite character ever because he was
Right.
just like a badass. And so I collected comic books coincidentally, and they just did a show about it. I can't think the name of it top of my head, but the comic about the girl and the guy, he's like super dark and she's white, and then like they together make this like team, and he can take people.
Cloak and Dagger.
Cloak and Dagger. Thank you so much. Right, my memory is terrible, bro. I collected Cloak and Dagger. I was a huge fan of the What Ifs. What got me in? I mean, as a kid, comic books were just like I think escape. I think even as adults, right? They offer an insight into a world and sometimes that we want to live in, and people we'd like to be. So I've been reading comic books, literally since I was a kid. At some point, it would have been when I was in the Army. I can't remember exactly when. I had a decent sized collection, nothing incredible, but I actually gave it away to someone that we both know, Lance. I gave my entire collection to Lance. I was moving. I just don't remember the exact details, but I remember just like, I can't take these with me. And I said, Lance, you're a comic book dude. Do you want these? And he was like, sure. And I literally gave him my entire collection. So I went many years without reading comic books. And then I will say maybe 2 years ago, I stepped foot in a comic store for the first time in a very long time. And it's overwhelming. And I'm sure, it is just like everything. There's 50 million Spider-Man titles. There's 50 million X-Force and X-Men and mutants and New Mutant titles. And so most times I walk in, I look around and walk out. But recently I've started just like going in, I was like, okay, I'm going to get something. Just get something. So I actually right now I have Something Is Killing the Children, which we'll be talking about, and She-Hulk, the new She-Hulk, is actually the two that I'm like collecting actively. But yeah, I mean, I love comics and they're just so much fun, So yes.
Absolutely. Now, before we get started on this, tell us a little bit about Off the Beaten Podcast for those who don't know your show.
Yeah. Oh, thank you for asking. Yeah, man. Off the Beaten Podcast is my pod. I've been doing a little over, I think it's close to 3 years now. I always in short say it's a podcast about Chicago people and Chicago shit. But it's a podcast that highlights Chicago and the people that I come across that make this city unique and amazing. Because unfortunately, so much you hear about Chicago is negative, like especially now. I feel like the news media, and I'm not talking like fake news, nothing like that, but just like the news media focuses on sex and negativity because that's what sells. Because we'll sit and watch a car wreck all day long, right? So I feel like there's so much of that like I wanted to just offer a counterpoint to it because Chicago is beautiful, man. I've lived most of my life here, and I live on the south side of Chicago, which is often maligned as like the worst place on earth.
Right.
I walk, I bike, I hang, I eat, here on the south side of Chicago. And this is where I was born and raised. And it's lovely. And people need to know that. So I've been just highlighting people and issues of the city on my podcast. And yeah, it's been a fun journey. You've been on, we actually talked about Superman on it.
That's right.
Because I couldn't resist, even though it's not necessarily a Chicago topic. I was like, we gotta talk about this.
Right.
You're the man to talk about it with. So yeah, it's a cool pod and I enjoy doing it. So definitely encourage people to check it out.
Absolutely. I can definitely co-sign on that sentiment. It is a great show. You interview some really interesting people. I think the most recent one that I heard, you interviewed a Chicago poet. I don't remember what her name was.
Yeah, Idalmi Noriega, who is completely fascinating. She doesn't think of herself as fascinating. And if you listen to the pod, me and her actually met on a dating website. And as terribly as that went, yeah, she's a fascinating person and one of the smartest people I've probably ever met. So yeah, it's just kind of cool to connect with those people and kind of dig in. And like I always say, like, these are people that other people should know,
Right.
I would say you should run for mayor or you should be an alderman, and we always want to put people in these positions of power, but she's just a fascinating person who loves and cares about the city, and more people should know about her. And so that's kind of what I try to do on the pod.
Yeah. And speaking of running for office, I know that you, at the time of this recording, you're actually going to be running for office. Can you talk a little bit about that briefly?
Yes, I'm going to be running for a new position here in the city. It's called the Police District Council. It's a hyper local kind of office that's going to be a part of this new police accountability mechanism here in the city that was passed by ordinance. So, kind of one of the first in the nation police accountability mechanisms that's publicly elected. Super exciting. My work is actually in violence prevention and public safety and public health. So, as many things in my life that happen, someone kind of reached out to me and say, you know what, you'd be a good fit for this, which is actually how I got my job that I have currently. That's actually how I got my last job that I had, with someone like literally going, you'd be a good fit for this. And me going, really? And then like, let's take a look and okay, maybe. And there I am. So when someone said that to me, I love Chicago, which is, I think the nicest thing someone's ever said was my podcast was a love letter to the city. And I'm like, yeah, because I love this city, man, and so the opportunity to be a part of making it, I always say Chicago is not living to its full potential. So to me, running for this office, which is directly connecting to my community, helping be this liaison between the community and the police to develop better forms of policing and to inform the police about what the community is saying, is to me super exciting. And that's just, to me, I'm like, yeah, man, helping my city reach its full potential, I'm in. So
absolutely.
Yes. So thank you for asking.
And at the end of this episode, we'll talk a little bit about how people in Chicago can help Dion, how you can get in touch with him and get involved with his campaign. But first things first, let's get right into the topic at hand. Something is killing the children.
Yeah, it is.
Now, I, for one, am terrible. I've said this before many, many times, almost every episode that I've had here, that I am horrible at describing a synopsis of a specific comic. So I tend to let things like comic book resources or Wikipedia do that for me. So in this case, we're actually going to go to the Boom Studios website and actually read the description.
Oh, cool.
It says here, when the children of Archer's Peak begin to go missing, everything seems hopeless. Most children never return, but the ones that do have terrible stories, impossible stories of terrifying creatures that live in the shadows. Their only hope of finding and eliminating the threat is the arrival of a mysterious stranger, one who believes the children and claims to see what they can see. Her name is Erica Slaughter. She kills monsters. That is all she does, and she bears the cost because it must be done. Now, I don't know about you, but that alone makes me super interested in this comic book series. I want to hear from you. What was your first impression upon reading that first issue?
Oh, man, I was just drawn in. Just everything about it, the story, obviously, if you've not read it, it opens with these kids together and they're telling like campfire horror stories, and then basically it kind of flips over to one of the kids in the police station, and he's now describing that these kids were basically brutally murdered and like he's like, I don't know what happened. and so you're like, oh, okay. And then it flips over again to Erica and her doing her thing. And now just in the beginning can kind of start putting these pieces together that she's basically like, it says, okay, they're monsters. I'm here to kill them. Okay, I got to go to Archer Heights. Here we go. And the story's off and running. And like the art is amazing, which is what drew me to it. I actually saw it sitting on the shelf, and just the I guess the typography of the name, the way the letters look on the top of,
right.
And it just says something is killing the children. I saw that literally from across the store, and I was like, ooh. Because I've only ever really read Marvel comics in my life. So this to me is a huge departure to what I normally read. And it just draws you in, man. And it's so beautiful. I'm not sure what the style of art is or what it's called or whatever, but it's gorgeous. And it's just, yeah. It's not, and it's even not even quite what I thought it was going to be. Because I do some writing and I've been writing a lot of horror as of late myself. So I thought it was going to be like this kind of like uber horror comic, and it's not quite that. It's a lot of adventure, there's fighting, there's a lot of different stuff and a lot of intrigue. So it's a complete package. So after that first issue I was in, and I think I
Yeah.
told you earlier when we were kind of talking, I like went back to the store and I bought everything.
Yeah.
So I own actually issues 1 through 25. I've only read like 1 through 7 because I
Mhm.
didn't want to get too far ahead for our discussion, but yeah, I'm
Right.
ready to go. And so yes.
Yeah. No, I had the same impression. Now, I have to credit you with actually putting me on to this comic because I actually hadn't heard of it before. My head has been sort of in the sand with very specific comic book companies. Like I'm essentially an Image guy. I love almost everything that comes out of Image Comics
Yes,
Studios.
of course.
And
Yeah.
so I'm all in on a lot of those titles. So this kind of slipped past me. And it wasn't until you mentioned it and I was like, maybe I need to go back and revisit that one. The first thing that struck me was that it was not what I thought it was going to be. Like when I hear that title, Something is Killing the Children, that makes me think of like a disease or something ominous or
Mm-hmm.
something that is not like a physical being that's
Yeah.
killing the children, but like maybe like there's a mist or a fog or something and that is killing the children. It actually turns out to be like this giant monster that only children can see.
See.
I thought like, wow, what a premise. Like that really struck me right off the bat that like, okay, it really changes your perception of like what it's going to be based off of the title.
Yeah.
And then of course, you mentioned the art. I think Deladera did a fantastic job in the art here. And I have to say, the colorist, Miguel Muerto, his choices in terms of the color palette, in
Mm-hmm.
terms of it not being too saturated, but certain things like some of the characters' eyes, the choice of color for the eyes of the Slaughter fam, like the House of Slaughter, those characters have these very unusual eye colors, and that's how you can identify them as monster hunters. I thought that was a
Yes.
very interesting choice. It really does a good job of sort of setting those characters apart. Like, right off the bat that Erica does not belong here. Like she's somebody she's somebody completely different. And this is not a slow burn like a lot of other comics where it really takes a couple of issues to really get going.
Nope.
Like you said, right off the bat, it starts off with this like almost ghost story. It's really a truth or dare game that they're playing.
Yes.
And this kid who thinks that he's actually made something up turns out that the thing is actually real and actually winds up killing his friends.
Mm-hmm.
And now he has to answer for like what has happened to his friends, and no one believes him.
Yeah.
There's just so many little pockets of intrigue just in these first like few chapters. I could go on and on and on and on about it.
Yeah,
But
it's just so it's very compelling because it's a simple story, right? It's a monster story.
mhm.
But the kind of how it unrolls, how Erica fits into it, and then the his name is escaping me, kind of the main character, like the young man
Mhm.
you're talking about,
Yeah, James.
James, right? He's the only survivor of a massacre. So like everyone is like, you killed him, didn't you? And it, dives into some of the issue, because basically there's these constant references from everyone that he's homosexual, that he was
Mhm.
attracted to one of the kids, which at least issues 1 through 5 is a little ambiguous, right? He
Right.
insinuates, but doesn't, they dive into some of those issues because Erica is basically stuck with this kid because he has the information she needs to try
Right.
to find, the monsters that she's looking for. And yeah, but like you said, like right out the box, there's some blood flying, there's guns, and there's knives, and you're like, oh, okay, here we are.
Yeah.
Here we are. And it goes. So yes, great. At least, straight out the box, straight, really great read.
Yes. I mean, another thing that I like about it is the subtext, like
Yeah.
how these characters deal with grief in all
Yeah.
of their different ways. Like there's a scene with one of the characters' mother and
Mhm.
father, and they both deal with the supposed loss of the youngest daughter in the
Yes.
family. Even though she hasn't been found, she hasn't been pronounced dead, they know in their hearts that like we've lost her, and
Yeah.
they each deal with it in these completely different ways. And I just found that to be super, super interesting.
Yeah, it's just like, I think, this kind of go, like I was saying, the simplicity of the story could be, but they deal with like the characters, right? So the older brother is living with the mom, and how they're dealing with their grief versus the father and how he's dealing with his. And then constantly how James is dealing with his, and the accusations that are floating around, even though not directly, not public, or the police aren't after him, but everyone's like, you did it, didn't you? And
Right.
it's a lot, and it deals with those issues very, very well. And that just makes it so it's tasty. It's very
Yeah.
tasty.
I thought we'd take a second and talk about the dollar value of these books. Now,
Mm-hmm.
at the time of its initial publishing, the average cost of each of these 5 issues was $3.99. It's pretty standard across the board nowadays for these types of comics. But today, the average cost of each individual issue is about $245, with the first issue being worth around $650. Now, that is for, of course, a graded 9.6 or higher, probably slabbed. I'm even seeing some that are ungraded go for, somewhere in the neighborhood of $200, $300. And then, of course, the other ones kind of varying between $75, $100, $300, depending on the issue.
Yeah.
Now, for a comic that was released in June of 2019, that is a tremendous markup.
Yeah.
That is, I mean, the demand for this thing is simply incredible. But that said, does that sway your verdict one way or the other as far as whether or not this comic series is a collectible?
Yeah. I don't think you're gonna say $50. You get $50. You know what? I think that's just a testament. So it's interesting. Everyone I've mentioned this comic to, who was familiar with it, has said the same thing. Mm-hmm. Oh, it's awesome. You're gonna love, like the guy. And one of the things, the guy in the store, I said, what do you know about this comic? Oh man. he's like, it's awesome. He goes, and then he said it won the Eisner Award. He was kind of telling me, he gave me a brief overview, and I was like, oh, okay, I'm in. As you said, the beauty of it, right? You could take almost any issue of it, frame it, and it's a piece of art upon itself, which I'd love to know more about. Like, because it has all the cover variants, and some of the covers, like, it's like 3 or 4 like different. Like, I'm like, how do you do that and stay in business? But I guess people are willing to buy, and each one is more beautiful and more interesting than the last. And also like how each one plays to a different type of art fan, if you will. Like, I see that picture behind you, and that's kind of like one variation of the art you see tied to this title, but it's not the only type of art you see. Some is a little bit more in your face, and so I'm like, yeah, that makes sense to me, because I would, if I had money to throw around and buy them all and put them in frames, I would. So
yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. I'm inclined to agree. I mean, I usually ask this question because for a lot of people, if there's a huge jump in the value, sometimes that sways a person from like collectability. It's like, I'm not going to spend that much on a comic book,
Yeah.
But for me, that is investment gold.
Yes.
Do you know what I mean?
Absolutely.
Especially if you're looking to collect original art, and maybe not the issues themselves, although I highly recommend getting these issues at least in a trade just for the story. But if you're just looking at, like, say, the art behind me, if I could get this as an original art piece, I 100% would. I mean, This is fantastic artwork from Deladero and Muerto. Story-wise, I think James Tynion, just seeing that guy's name right off the bat just intrigues me, just because he has quite the pedigree in terms of like his work with DC. He's done a lot of Batman stuff, a lot of Justice League stuff with Marvel. I think he was involved with the death of Wolverine. Like, he's done a tremendous amount of storytelling. Just to see him attached to something like this without even reading it, I already knew it was going to be good.
Right. I don't mess that crappy stuff.
No.
Yeah. And also it just helps, because like I used to teach, and using comic books and graphic novels in the classroom is something that now I feel like is almost fairly common. Like it's become a common, like there are companies that cater just to creating graphic novels and comic books for the classroom. But
Right.
like this to me was also kind of one of those things that like it can show that comic books are not just comics, right? It's not just a
Right.
silly thing to read and oh, that's whatever, and you toss it in the garbage or what have you. Like they can rise above to being something more, right? To
Right.
being literature and to being art. And so yeah, I was just really happy I saw this. A shout out to, so I was in one of the better known comic book stores here in the city, Graham Crackers, and
Right.
huge shout out to them to, you know, like having it displayed prominently alongside the, you know, Marvel and DC takes over most of the store, but but they're great at having both local comic books. There's a gentleman here in the city named Art Balthazar, and I actually collect some of his. He has like it's very cartoonish action comics, right? They're very cartoonish. Like I don't even know what to compare it to for children, you know, and adults, but like very kid oriented, very fun. And he had his stuff and then this, and it was great to me to get exposed to that stuff because most stores, Marvel and DC, do take over, and you don't necessarily get to see the independent lines or, you know, the other lines or even local artists. So I was thankful for that, and then thankful that I caught on to this. And yeah.
Same. So I think at this point we can go ahead and give an official verdict. So let me ask you, what say you on this one? Collect or reject?
Collect. Get it. get on the train, even if you can't get into it for the, you know, for the trade value and for, you know, for that investment, which if you can, fabulous. Because like for me, like, and I think we talked about this, most issues 1 through 23, I think for me are all compendiums, right? They're all just like, first one is 1 through 5 and then 6 through 10, so on and so forth. But it's just, yeah, it's a great read. And then like now I'm collecting the individual issues. So I have 24 and 25, or even 21 to 25 in individual issue form. Great, beautiful, and yeah, worth the read. And yeah, definitely a collectible. I can't wait to see where the story goes, you know. So I'm in the boat.
Yep. I have to agree. I mean, you and I talked off mic about how I had read pretty much the first 10 issues here just completely online. Since I've kind of fallen in love with this series, I've kind of decided pretty much right after this episode is done, I'm running down to my local comic book store. Shout out to the Destination here in Louisville, Kentucky.
Yes.
And I will be picking up as many of these issues as I can. This is 1,000% a collectible for me. Probably one of my favorite comic series in recent years. I mean, I really have been enjoying this so far.
Yeah, that's what's up, man. That's what's up. So yeah, thank you for spreading the good news.
Absolutely. And thank you for introducing this to me.
You know, the comics like this, they aren't necessarily like well known. And so like when I go to like things like C2E2 is coming up in the spring, and like I would love to see people doing there's some Killing the Children cosplay or people to talk to it about, you know, and with these smaller titles, there's not always a lot of that. And so I'm like, have you read this one? And people are like, no.
Yeah.
It's interesting.
Right? Yeah. It's interesting that you say that, because I do believe that the momentum towards this is picking up. And I just learned this yesterday, that Netflix actually has optioned this as a story. So they're going to do a live adaptation of this first volume.
Wow. Okay, that's exciting. Oh, very cool. See, we were on the train before. We could be those guys.
Yeah, we can be like, well, man, I was reading it before. It was cool, man. You guys are just latecomers.
I told someone yesterday, yo, I was watching Cobra Kai when it was still on YouTube.
Yep. I do that all the time. All the time. I
was there.
Like the Sandman, for example, like, you know, brilliant show, but like, yeah, like I big time people all the time with that, bro. I've had these comics since the 80s, like, you know.
Very old. Sorry. Sorry to tell you, very old. Oh, that's
all right. Well, we'll leave it there. And once again, I'd like to thank my guest, Dion McGill, for being here today. Before you go, please tell our audience where they can find you.
Yeah, man. You can catch me. I have a I have a website for the podcast. It's just offthebeatenpodcast.com. And then the podcast itself has Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. So, please follow me there. Please let me know that you heard about the podcast here or wherever you did hear about it. I love interacting with people and getting, input and just hearing perspectives and thoughts. So that's also great. And as for me, I'm findable, I guess, somewhere. Somewhere. And yeah. So, just Google me, I guess. I don't know. Where
all right, I'm going to help you out here. So folks, right. Folks in Chicago, if you want to help with Dion's campaign, or just check him out, just find out a little bit about who he is, what he's about. You can find him on Facebook. That his last name is MC small c large Gill. Reach out to him. I think that this is a guy that can really make a difference in Chicago, and you would be doing yourself a huge, huge, huge service if you helped him out with his campaign. So there's that.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Thank you, brother.
Absolutely. And of course, I want to thank you all for listening. If you like what you heard today, please rate and review this episode. Until next time, this is Mark Withers. Catch you on the next page.
Collect or Reject is a production of Press Play Media in association with Von Keith Sounds. This episode was produced and edited by Mark Withers, music by Keith Sewell. Something is Killing the Children was created by James Tynion IV and Werther Deladero for Boom Studios. For more information on this and other episodes, visit us at collectorreject.com.